everyone to Lacoste King Gallery. I am Lacoste King, and you are?
Lucy Lacoste.
Thanks for coming to the Ani Kasten Artist Talk. She's with us today. We had a wonderful reception yesterday, opening her fifth solo show at this gallery. So today she's going to spend a couple of hours with us talking about her art and her work. So I'm going to pass this to you.
Briefly.
Because you know Ani very, very well. In fact, I actually commented how she's like your child.
She could be my child.
Oh, your sister. So because you've known her so long, I think
Thank you.
Five solo shows is a lot. So
yes.
and you've seen her, through all her progression. So you will do the talking about Ani and introducing her.
She
Okay,
will
and
really
then she will then talk about her career, her art, and especially about the show. And after that, we'll do a Q&A. Okay? All right. So I'm going to leave the stage.
Okay.
Lucy.
Yes, honey. You ready for me to start?
You're ready. Ready.
Okay.
Yes.
So, welcome again, everybody. This is a very auspicious and meaningful moment, because so many of you, not just me, have known Ani's career and watch it progress and grow. Many of you through the shows in this gallery. So, for us, we're very proud to present this exhibition, Debris Poems, which is your fifth solo exhibition with us. So this show really, to me, celebrates our relationship, which goes back to 2008 is when it started. So this is the fifth solo. Yeah. So in this exhibition, Ani continues to explore her fascination with the deconstruction of the vessel, and you're also exploring a visual poem, which you will say so much more about. I'll leave that to you. So you will see, in this exhibition, you'll see these beautiful, freely thrown pieces, expressively thrown with wash of color that you use like a painting. These pieces also incorporate wire, studio debris, found objects, dirt, and so much more. Ani is largely a self-taught artist. Her studies of English, her apprentice with the great English artist Rupert Spira, and your 5 years in Nepal all feed into your work. So not only are you a self-taught artist, but I feel like she is a self-made woman. You've had many projects, like your project in Maryland, where you rehabbed and repurposed the old shoe repair shop into studio, gallery, and living space, right? Mm-hmm. And then now you are sort of doing the same thing in Minnesota, right? So, and while you do this, not only are you doing this, but you're continuing to show nationally and internationally. Your work can be found in many museums, including the Racine, the Weissman, and
the Minnesota Museum of American Art, and the U.S. State Department collection.
That's wonderful. Yeah, so we're really pleased to have with us today this gutsy woman who never stops pushing the envelope, and who has shown with us so many times. So thank you, Ani, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lucy and Lyson. It's, as always, a great pleasure and an honor to be here. I'm very grateful to Lacoste Gallery for kind of giving me my first chance as a professional artist. Lucy has believed in me and in my work for quite a long time now, over a decade, which means a lot to me, as I'm sure you can imagine. Getting anywhere in the art world is no easy task, and I absolutely wouldn't be where I am today without such a champion who also knows so much about the field of ceramic art and has, I think, one of the best eyes for the best in ceramic art. That's you. I do feel like this gallery is a like homecoming of sorts every time I do have a show here, because Lucy does know my work almost as well as I do in a way, because she has seen me through all the various ideas, concepts, methods that I've tried and shown with her gallery. So it's a very meaningful relationship for my career. And this show that is here, which you'll be able to have a closer look after we are done talking with some additional information, is really has been very close to my heart, just the whole concept of it. And I did start out as a writing major at an arts high school, and then I continued on to get a bachelor's degree in English literature. So the poetic form and just somehow translating that concept from a verbal or written media into a visual media was an interesting challenge for me. So in thinking about the concept of the show, I read an article about one of my favorite poets recently who died 5 years ago, who's Adrienne Rich, who some of you might be familiar with her work, and if not, you should definitely go read some of her work, because she's just a magnificent, powerful, just feminist activist poet who her words just kind of like pierce right into my heart. And this time that I've been trying to live as a creative person and make artwork has been very challenging. And she was in her career awarded a National Medal for the Arts by President Clinton, which she actually refused to accept because she felt that the meaning of art is sort of incompatible with the cynical politics of that time, which I could certainly say the same thing about now. And that there's no easy relationship between art and justice, and that in her own case, which was poetry, that art means nothing if it simply decorates the dinner table of power that holds it hostage, which those words just really kind of cut through some nebulous ideas that have been floating around in my head for a while. It's been a very challenging thing to be a creative person making art in the new ugly America, as I see it. So, and this has actually taps into a theme that runs through my work for a long time now. Like, you might have noticed that my work is not beautiful in an easy sense. The work is, I think of it a little bit as ugly beautiful, which for me, making art is about communicating truthfulness. At least that's what I hope to do in my work. And for me, there's no way to communicate truthfulness without embracing ugliness, injustice, suffering. And so in this body of work, that's kind of the metaphoric meaning of the debris. So I have created these 6 small works that are here in the middle of the gallery, which are the debris poems. And I chose the idea of a poem because poetry is a sort of very concise, very hewn, formal missive that has nothing in it that's unnecessary. It's like everything is just kind of sheared away into this very concise composition. And so with the debris poems, that was kind of the concept I was working with and just kind of taking debris, which I see as like evidence of our experience or evidence of our life story. And Adrienne Rich said another thing, which is that so many would be glad to just lie down with the shards we have painfully unearthed and be satisfied with those. But truthfulness and art making requires a heightened complexity. So I don't want to just leave the debris as that's what it is. I want to, in my practice, build it into something that is more whole and more meaningful, and maybe a way to embrace or deal with some of the pain or injustice or suffering that I experience around me. So that's kind of the concept behind this group of work, which I don't think I need to say too much more about it. You can look and see what you get from it. And I do have some slides here to show that will just be kind of talking about my life and my studio, and some process photos and even some videos of these pieces. So I am currently living in Minnesota, where I moved 3 years ago to a farm in the St. Croix River Valley, which, as some of you might know, is a real heartland of studio pottery in America. Warren Mackenzie was living and working very close by to where I live, and there are many studio potters living all in that area. And I, before that, was living in the DC area for 10 years, and I was invited to be part of the St. Croix Pottery Tour in 2012, where I then every 5 years, or for 5 years, I was there every year as a guest artist. And the St. Croix Pottery Tour is, it was started 28 years ago by 7 studio potters who all have their studios in that St. Croix River Valley, and they each would invite a small number of guests. Now it's up to 8 at each studio. And it is a celebration of studio pottery. We have now 65 guest artists who come from all over the country, and most of them nationally known veteran artists who work in ceramics, and then also some younger new people get folded in. I was one of those people in 2012, and after being a guest there for 5 years, my host, who was one of the original hosts of it, wanted to retire from hosting and wanted to hand her tour stop onto the next generation, and she chose me also because I was willing to move there. So I ended up buying this small farm from her where the pottery tour is hosted, and the barn houses my studio. And when we have the pottery tour, we have these tents out on the lawn, and each of the artists have their own tent, and it's a lot of fun. If you love studio ceramics, please make your way out there on Mother's Day weekend one day soon, because it's there's nothing like it. We get 5 to 10,000 visitors over the weekend every year, and it's an absolute frenzy of pottery buying. And we have a bonfire and music, and it's a lot of fun, just everyone gathering together for their love of studio ceramics, which was a little bit of a stretch for me, because I do work in studio ceramics, but my work is very much more sculptural and non-functional than 100% of the other artists who exhibit on the tour. At my stop, which I took over from Connie in 2016, We do have some artists who work in sculpture. We have Robert Brady, who some of you might know, who also is a very fine figurative and object sculptor, but he shows his pots there at the pottery tour. But it's sort of, I'm living two lives in a way, just my administrative duties and my commitment to the tour is one part of my studio practice, and then I also have, I am compelled to make much more sculptural work than would fit in with the tour. So I'm just a very busy artist doing all kinds of different projects. But I would say that this work that's here is my true love as an artist. This is what I would love to be doing all the time. And this is a gallery that I created up above my studio in the hayloft of the barn, which we also use for the pottery tour, and I share it with my neighbor who was the former host of the tour, Connie Marin. So our work is kind of mixed together in there, but it's a very dramatic, beautiful space to show ceramics. So I did start out as a potter, so I still return again and again to the vessel kind of over the years. That's always a grounding point for my work, and I have worked on the wall, which later on there are a few slides from previous exhibitions that I've had here that featured some of the work that I made on the wall, but many of these pieces in this show started out on the wheel, and then they get subject to very violent acts to turn them into what you see here. This is actually me working on that very large vessel that was in the front of the gallery. And I use some kind of traditional practices, throwing and then combining two bowls and paddling the shape out to kind of perfect the form, which the paddling technique was something I learned while I was in Nepal. That's their sort of traditional way of making these large water storage and grain storage vessels. And then once I have the vessels formed, then I begin to destroy them in various ways with added on sculptural elements. This is a piece of porcelain that gets turned into various abstracted handles and lugs on the sides of the vessels. And I'm using a mixture, not only a mixture of various debris that builds up in the studio, but a dark black stoneware clay is usually the foundation for most of these pieces, and then it gets combined with porcelain just by slathering on a slab of clay or building a little finial with wire and porcelain. So I don't sit down much. These are some of the in-process pieces, so you can see that I'm just kind of embedding shards of different things that were once other things, which I've destroyed and broken and recycled them into something else. And I also love the interactions between clay and other materials, the wire, and I have worked with wood, which I usually can't combine in the firing, obviously, because the wood would turn to ash, but so experimenting with various kinds of hardware in attaching wood to clay has been a lot of fun. This is this piece over here, which is a woven vessel with porcelain and kiln coils. My kiln elements have to be replaced from time to time, so I don't like to throw that stuff away because it makes really good studio debris to sculpt with. And there's a yellow piece in the front that also is one of my favorites, using the kiln coils that are kind of bursting in and out of the sides of the vessel. These are some of these earthly creature pieces in process in my studio, and I always work in series because it really helps me get deep into the idea and develop it, and each one will end up being very, very unique. And these are some bowls with wire stitching, and this piece in the front is that black bowl, also at the front of the gallery in process. This was a piece that I made a few years ago that's I found this piece of wood that looks like a skeleton of a bird's wing, and so I incorporated ceramic pieces to make this combined wood and ceramic wing. It's quite a large piece. It's about 4 feet by 18 inches tall or so, and I have a finished picture of it later on in the slide. These are also some of the debris poems in process, waiting to be fired. It's my work table on any given day. So this is an image from, I think it was my third show here at Lacoste, which was compositions that combined vessel work and these wall compositions, which were made of plaster, scrap wood, scrap metal, ceramic shards that I made as a plaster pour, and then I would embed the objects in the pieces. And so this, to me, kind of feels like the origins of just working with scrap and kind of reconstructing a whole composition out of brokenness. And this show, I think, was in 2010 or 2012, maybe? Later. Right. So maybe 2014, maybe. And then I had another show, Frequencies, which also was featuring wall pieces using these kind of ceramic shards put together into compositions, as well as sculpture with wood and ceramic. And these were just kind of old pieces of wood I found doing renovating when I was in Maryland. So like wood that has coffee cup stains on it, which I was careful to preserve with varnish, and ceramic debris. This is the wing piece with the wood and ceramic. And these were bookends, which I was asked to be in a show that was a set of bookends from, I think, about 10 different artists. And mine were titled Unearthed, and they also There are so many lakes and rivers, and this was a ceramic stool that I made using 3 legs from, it was a collaboration with some beavers in Minnesota. And this was also sort of a ladle with a handle made from the beaver chew leg. And another concept that has kind of run through my work the last few years is utilitarian objects that are very abstracted, that sort of reference utility and look like maybe they were once functional in some way, but we don't really know for what or when or what they could be used for now. And then this was a piece that I had in my last show here in 2017 that was a spirit ship, and this was in some ways the beginning of this series of work, just very deconstructed, very skeletal, and kind of a vestige of a ship of some kind, but only just exposed infrastructure remaining. So all of that has kind of built into this whole show that you see here in front of you today. So those are all the images that I have, and I would be happy to answer any questions that people have about the work or anything else I talked about.
Questions?
Can you say anything about how you introduce color in the pieces?
Yeah, so my work has been getting markedly more colorful, especially this group of work, which all of this has been in the last 6 months or so. I've made in the last 6 months, and it might be because I have moved to such a wintry, gray place that I am sort of craving color, and also I think just the ugliness that I see in the world, I want to infuse some joy in there somewhere, and I feel like the color has been a good way for me to introduce a joyful element to the work. I think it would be really dark if I didn't have the color for these pieces. And with ceramics, you cannot apply color and have any idea what the final product is going to look like. So it's sort of like being an intuitive painter, and I really have enjoyed developing my intuition about color and about colors interacting and mixing, and I think it sort of opened up like a secret sense that I didn't know I had, because I just love the way the colors interact, and it could have not gone that way because you apply the color and it's like a white powder, and then you just can't know until it's through the firing how the colors are going to interact. So I think I will continue to develop that going forward.
How are these fired, and why did you choose that way to do it?
So all of my work is fired in an electric kiln. It's very simple programmed electric firing, and in my training when I was an apprentice in England, we did reduction gas firing. That was my training. And then when I went back to the States and tried to build my studio, I was in an urban place, kind of one after another. I was in Oakland for a little while, and then the DC area, and the chimney for the kiln in an urban setting, I mean, sometimes they won't even let you do it, but said, oh, that will be $10,000, you know, just for the chimney. And I'm, you know, just starting out. I haven't had my show at Lacoste yet. And so I thought, well, I'm just going to use an electric kiln. And so many people disparage that way of firing because they think, oh, your surfaces will be so flat and so boring and so uninteresting. And I've never felt limited by the electric kiln because truthfully also my interest in making is much more about the forming and the sculpting and building up the surface, and I feel no desire to stand outside for 4 days chopping wood. I'd rather be in the studio spending 4 days making a big sculpture. And then I can just put it in the electric kiln and push a button, and I come back 2 days later and it's done. So that's just kind of how I've been working. I do have a gas line. I ran a gas line to my studio, so in the future, when I become a big successful artist, I can buy a gas kiln and hook it up. But for now, I just am happy with my 2 electric kilns.
Could you talk about the wire? Maybe you already did, but I came a little late.
Oh, yeah. So I've always liked mixing ceramic with other materials. I like to see how they interact, for better or for worse. I mean, ceramic is a very kind of uncompromising material, and it's not friendly with other materials. Like with wood, there's really no way to attach it other than drilling a hole and using hardware, because wood expands and shrinks, and clay, once it is fired, it is completely static. It's never going to move. It'll break before it will move. And the wire can be fired with the ceramic, but it definitely creates tension on the form. And it just sort of reminds me of like bones with flesh kind of disintegrating around them, or like a building demolition with, you know, steel rebar and, you know, pieces of plaster hanging off, and just kind of like infrastructure that is there and meant to be a structure, but it maybe is not as resilient as it should be or as it seems. And I like going for that tipping point with my work, like where the infrastructure is there, but it's not necessarily reliable. And so the wire is that structurally and also metaphorically.
Another question. In pushing your work in the sculptural direction, are you tempted or foreseeing kind of getting off the pedestal entirely? Is that something?
For now, I really like making objects, and I'm sort of comfortable with that for now, even though it isn't necessarily cool in the art world. I mean, I think object makers kind of get like pigeonholed or something, but I feel like objects are really tap into like our daily routine, and like they can be lived with and handled, and they're accessible to everyone, I think. And some of those ideas are still important to me in my work, and they're also just what I love personally as an artist. I have my sculpture and my wall pieces are still objects. I don't really feel any need to start doing like conceptual art or performance or anything like that. That can be for other artists who have that persuasion. Mm-hmm.
So, Ani, where is the work going now? Is it even continuing in this direction? And are you thinking bigger, smaller, colorful?
I mean, this.
Because this to me is much more sculptural.
Yeah. This was kind of like a big push for me. Just organizing an idea very cohesively, and there are quite a lot of pieces in the show, and I might stay here for a while and make some more of this work, varying sizes. Yeah, maybe bigger and more sculptural. But it was, it was 6 months, only 6 months, which isn't such a long time, I think, for me to work with a concept. So I think I could keep doing this and pushing it further, and I definitely want to keep exploring the color because it's enjoyable and I like the results.
Thank you very much. Did you read the poem to them, to the audience, the Adrian Rich?
Oh, I didn't read the poem. It was just some quotes from some essays that she wrote about the creative life and how to kind of like the responsibilities of artists to truthfulness and to not just only embrace things that are pretty or popular or easy, and that sometimes you have to really embrace the difficult stuff and the ugly stuff, and that's kind of our responsibility as artists.
Such a fascinating talk. Wonderful questions.
Thank you so much for joining us.